Financial organisations in the City of London are facing calls to overhaul the working culture for younger staff following the tragic death of a 21-year-old intern with a leading bank. Moritz Erhardt, an aspiring young student from Germany, collapsed in the shower as he neared the end of a 7-week internship with the investment division at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch, during which he'd allegedly worked up to 72 hours without rest. The exact cause of his death is unknown, but critics of the long hours culture in investment banking have been quick to point to claims that Moritz worked through the night 8 times in 2 weeks in a bid to impress company bosses, returning home at 6 a.m. on 3 consecutive days. Of course, pulling an all-nighter in order to get ahead isn't restricted to the world of international finance. Anyone who's started and run their own business knows that the price of success is often sleepless nights in front of a computer screen, processing orders and touting for trade. Often, the pressure to keep on working comes not just from external demands, but from our own psychological makeup. Certainly, in an online professional profile, Moritz Erhardt described himself as becoming highly competitive and ambitious from a very young age, with a persistent aspiration to be good at everything. Such drive could well be considered an advantage in business, but how often does it come at the expense of our health, our happiness, and our well-being? Has working crazy hours left you burned out and unwell? Do give us a call 0500 288 291, or you can email vine@bbc.co.uk. And I'm joined by Andrew Stead, former banker with Goldman Sachs, who now runs Your Daily Bread, which is an organisation dedicated to psychological well-being. He's here, and on the line, Sylvia Tidy-Harris, the Managing Director of the Speakers Agency and womenspeakers.co.uk. Let's kick off with Andrew. Hello there, thanks for joining us. So you joined Goldman Sachs straight out of university. Do you think you had a similar personality type to that that we've heard about Moritz Erhardt?
I think it's definitely the case that people who are joining banks these days, it's not just limited to banks, companies right away across the city, lawyers, accountants, they're very difficult to get into. So people who are very, very motivated, they're the people who get these jobs at the end of the day. So it's very challenging. And
is it important to show that you're not the guy that goes home, you're the guy that's still there?
I think for summer interns, unfortunately, as we've seen from this very tragic story, that's still very much the case because there's that element of competition. And so people need to demonstrate that they'll go that extra mile.
And we have to be fair, there is the highest youth unemployment currently on record. So if you want to get the gig, if you want to get the job at the end of it all, I suppose you have to stand out somehow, and this presumably is a way of standing out.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the articles around this, he obviously has seen this as a badge of honour, which is terribly sad and has ended up with this situation that we read about this morning.
But we hear that more and more it is considered a badge of honour to put in very, very, very long hours. I mean, this, eating lunch at your desk, you're just too busy, you can't leave the office even for a minute. That's considered to be a sign of commitment and a sign of dedication, isn't it?
Yeah, and yet at the same time, obviously, it's deeply unhealthy for our physical health, for our mental health, and there are significant repercussions either later on in life or for our system as a whole. I mean, culturally, this is not great news for the City of London, but not just for the City of London, for our entire society and culture.
When you were working at Goldman Sachs, what kind of hours did you or your colleagues put in?
Well, actually, Vanessa, I worked on a trading floor, so I tended to work a standard, but a 12-hour day, which sounds very long, but it's not in comparison to some of the days that were worked in the corporate finance area, where overnight or even weekends were just absolutely regular. People would be lucky to have a weekend off once every quarter or something like this. So, it's just the level of intensity is extraordinary compared to what most people would understand as regular jobs.
Do you think big city firms seek out people with the potential to be workaholic?
Well, if you've got one of those jobs by demonstrating that you went the extra mile and then you worked in there and you've risen to the top, then of course naturally by some level or other you're looking for those type of people. That's how you've risen, and you're looking for that level of commitment in the people that you tend to hire. So I think that is naturally, unfortunately for this system, what tends to happen.
Do you believe it to be necessary? Do you think it really is essential that the job is so demanding you really still need to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning? Or do you think actually it's a sign of, misorganisation, it's a sign of wanting to be seen to be there, but not really a sign of anything that's essential to be doing?
I definitely think there's an element of face time which is problematic, but I think one of the things is, that these banks or these legal companies or the accountants, they have to demonstrate to their clients that they can do anything at the drop of a hat, and that's how they compete for business. So if they're saying that I can produce something for you on Monday morning at a meeting on Friday afternoon, then they'll go and do that, which means that people then have to work over the weekend. So it's systematic. It operates at all levels through the system, and I think that's the difficulty. And what's interesting, very sadly, about this story is that it's touched someone right at the very beginning of this process, who's a young student, who's got, he's gifted at tennis and many other things. He's done very many other things already in life, and yet sadly it's gone already as a consequence of this.
It's unbearably sad, absolutely. Do you think that there's a culture, therefore, among bosses, which is, I did it, I sacrificed, I don't remember sleeping throughout my 20s, then you will have to do the same thing, and not a culture of, let me try and make life a little easier for you than it was for me, as this was really not necessary at all?
I think when you work in these cultures, values get blurred, and I don't think when people walk into them, or even if they step out in their everyday lives in the street, I don't think that they're the values that they walked into in the first place, but they get blurred, and so they just tend to expect these extraordinary long hours, doing these other types of commitments that are not regular. But then the people who are in those, and I was one of them, I sat in that organisation for almost a decade, and worked too hard, and it just felt normal. And until you stop and say, why is this going on? Why am I doing this? And what are the consequences on my, as I say, physical, mental, but all other aspects of my life? Then you really don't question it.
Let's bring in Sylvia Tidy-Harris. Sylvia, thanks for joining us. It's quite clear it's not only people who work for others who are forced into these incredibly long hours of work. Sometimes it's yourself. You're the person setting up the business. You're the entrepreneur, and you've got to be the person doing the work.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Vanessa. Yes, that is so true. Driving here to speak to you, my husband and I were reminiscing where he used to go out on a 12-hour shift. I would get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock at the same time as him when I was running the business from home in the early days, and he would come home at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and he would find me still in the nightwear I was wearing at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I probably would have had maybe a sandwich and a glass of water or a cup of tea, but I had worked right through. And this happened for some years until we decided to get an office so that we could bring some structure, because I was working Saturdays and Sundays. It was the time when you're just building things up, and it was only when my brother died of sudden death syndrome 9 years ago that we suddenly took stock and said, right, let's start something. So we've got some routines. So we joined Champneys Health Spa that's local to us, and we started going there all the time for swims and so forth, and then steadily building up a bit of exercise. But even now, I'm absolutely rubbish at time management. I still work long hours. I still get stressed. It is very, very hard. It puts pressure on your marriage, on your family, on your friends, and that applies to being in the city as well.
But here's the question. Do you do it because you need to? Do you do it because the business is growing and you have few staff and all the responsibilities on your shoulders? Or do you do it because, as you've just said, and I'm quoting you, you're not very good at time management? If somebody else were to be doing your job, would they be able to do it in a shorter time?
Well, I think that I could do with a slight coaching on time management, but on a serious side. It happens when you start. It happens when you're training new people. It happens, then you sort of motor on along, and then everything starts to go crazy again, which is all for the good of the bank balance and for the future of your employees. But equally, you're carrying that stress. We've just been through a very tight recession, and for a small to medium business like my own to actually hold its own was fantastic, and I'm really, really pleased. But it does, at least I can identify it now and know when to stop. I have a friend who does work in the city, and he'll get off a flight from New York, having worked all week, go straight in the office, not see his family until the following week, even though he's back in the UK. And that is a really frightening culture, and people have got, at least I'm doing it for ourselves, for us, not for somebody else.
Okay, well, here's the question, Sylvia, and then I'll ask Andrew the same question. You're young, you're ambitious, you've got what it takes. It would presumably necessitate enormous guts to say, yeah, I really do want to work here. I really want to be a banker, a lawyer, an accountant, and whatever it is, a doctor, a surgeon. But actually, I'm going home at 6:30 because I've done my work, and thanks a lot. I'll be back in the morning. I'll be there at 8, and I'll work really, really hard. But I'm not going to be part of this. I mean, Sylvia, it would take incredible guts to stand in the face of that culture.
Yeah, you wouldn't get anywhere, would you, Vanessa? You'd be absolutely stymied. So the fact is that I'm sure these banks have heard of shifts. They could put people on shifts so that they, albeit very highly paid shifts, could actually work like that. If we all know that less hours produces more productivity, you know that you're actually much more productive. So they really need to look at that. You can't have young men doing that. I mean, 72 hours straight. I mean, I used to be a stewardess many, many years ago, and we used to work some long hours. I was a tour director. We worked long hours, but we did have breaks, and it's the responsibility of the employer that what they're doing is illegal.
Sylvia,
to these people.
thank you. I'll just get the final word from Andrew on this. I mean, you did in the end claw back and say this isn't for me. I can't stand any more of it. It would take something for a youngster to do that, though.
I think the positive thing is a lot of younger people are actually looking at really what does make them happy, and I think there obviously are still people who are going into banking and these other types of jobs, but a lot of people who are thinking, actually, that's not for me because my happiness and well-being is going to be compromised, and so they're looking at very many different things, and that's very, very positive and beneficial for, I guess, the future, Vanessa.
Well, thanks very much indeed. So we're asking you, have you been working round the clock? Do you have kids? Well, grown-up kids, I suppose, who are doing precisely that. Maybe you set up your own business and there was no alternative. Maybe you're still at it with your nose to the grindstone. 0500 288 291.